Okay, all right, everyone, let's get started. Hope you all had a wonderful day so far, and thank you for making time to join tonight's webinar. So today we'll be sharing 2025's latest tips and strategies to stand out in college applications for Greater Houston area students. First, I would like to welcome our co-host Michelle to introduce herself.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you to Ingenious, my new friends. Howdy, everyone. This is our hello from Texas, and thank you for spending your Sunday night with us. My name is Michelle He. I am the co-founder and the chief academic officer of To the Top Education. We just formed this strategic partnership with Ingenious. Just a little bit of background about myself. Did not graduate from an Ivy League. I got my MBA from a small state university in San Francisco called San Francisco State. And then my bachelor's degree from State University of New York. So I got both coasts covered, like I was telling Stacy earlier. But I'm originally from China and I received my bachelor's degree from Peking University.
I think it's harder to get into Beta than it is to get into Harvard.
Yes, you've heard about the Beida. It's
Yes.
kind of like Harvard of China. So exciting announcement. This is truly the breaking news. Okay, the biggest news of this year so far. We're thrilled to announce the partnership between Ingenious Prep and To the Top Education. It's truly a marriage made in heaven because it's combining 150 plus former admissions officers' expertise with our local Houston insights to empower students with personalized strategies, exclusive workshops, and unmatched support for college applications and admission success. Really, it's your one-stop shop. Anything you need, we are here to provide that to you. Okay, so what kind of benefits are we offering here? First of all, we have, as I said earlier, really, I consider the Ingenious such a powerhouse, and it has really found this holy grail of college admissions because not only does it have 150 plus former top college admission officers, but also it has developed this proprietary in-house curriculum. So it has its own insider knowledge and personalized strategies. And because it has worked with, I would say, well, thousands of students over 12 years. So their students have a proven track record, 7 times more likely to get into top 10 universities. So we have this customized college admissions roadmap. So I want to tell our To the Top Education family and friends, we are bringing this to you. And this is, we have worked with many different companies over our 11-year history, and we really fell in love with Ingenious. We already worked with them with some of the high school students research, but now we feel like we can really offer more to our students. So we have this tailored support in academics, test prep, extracurriculars, and ACEs, truly a one-stop shop. And we can build a compelling and a unique application. And that's what we call the application persona. Of course, I'll let Joe speak more to that. And then we have some exclusive workshops. So we are going to have in-person workshops here in Houston very soon. College application, ACA workshop, and some individualized coaching. So this is really going to help our students stand out in a more and more competitive admissions landscape. It is an arms race. And again, we have this local support. So To the Top Education has been in the greater Houston areas for 11 years. We are intimately familiar with our local schools, their curriculums, their counselors. We've worked with hundreds of students, also with a very successful track record. And now we are combining that with Ingenious. And we are really maximizing the opportunities for our students at every step, starting with 8th grade.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. Next, I would like to welcome our host for tonight's webinar, Joe, to introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. My name is Joel Butterly. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ingenious Prep. I start by sort of echoing what Michelle put very eloquently, which is that we're unbelievably excited for our partnership with To the Top. Have been incredibly impressed by their understanding of sort of the local market, greater Houston area, and certainly also the some of the schools that we'll be talking about today as well. But it really is sort of a perfect match for us, and I think that allows us to really offer the best of both worlds to our students. Also, just been wonderful to work with Michelle and her team, who are just lovely people. So, thanks very much for having us. I'm from the just a little more about me. I'm from the Boston area originally. I was really into policy debate as a high schooler. I was actually recruited for college or to college for policy debate. So I went to Dartmouth. When I was there, I had two majors and a minor. The majors were in international relations and geographic information systems, which is like a very semi STEM degree within the geography department. And then my minor was in ethical philosophy. So I think sort of every Chinese parent's nightmare. I majored and minored in nothing of use. But fortunately, law schools do not require you to have majored in something of use. So afterwards, I went to Yale Law School, where actually I started in Genius while still a first-year student at Yale. And my wife and I lived in New Haven for about 10 or 11 years. She was getting her PhD. I did my JD. And now we split time between Maine, which is where I currently am, and New Haven.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Also a brief intro about myself. My name is Stacy, and I'm a marketing manager here at eGenius Prep. Okay, so before we move on, some quick housekeeping. If you have any comments or replies, if you would like to interact with the true and false questions, please submit them to the chat box. We would love to engage with all of you. Please do not use the raise hand feature because we can't see it. For specific questions you would like our speaker to answer, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and our speaker Joel and Michelle will be answering those questions in the end. Also, if you have the most updated Zoom version, you can click the captions button to enable the feature. We'll be sending out recordings for this presentation tomorrow, so if you want to revisit any part of it, please do check your email. So here's our agenda for today. I'll briefly introduce eGenius Prep, who we are and what we do, and then Joel will take us into the admissions insights, specifically around Texas region, the admissions process, and some important factors you may want to focus on in your own applications. And we will end up with some amazing real student case studies. So for those who are not familiar with us, I would like to start with an introduction on who we are and what we do. With the guidance of experienced professionals like Joe, parents choose eGenius Prep because we understand the importance of combining people, resources, curriculum, and results to provide students with a well-rounded support system. We will talk more about these elements in the next few slides. So we are a team of over 150 former plus admissions officers. Our former admissions officers come from top schools all over the country. They have worked in the admission offices, have reviewed college applications, and have made decisions on these applications. So they have admission insights and are all very experienced and have successfully helped countless of our students apply for their top schools. So with their experience, they will create personalized college admission strategy for our students. Next, we also have over 150 plus graduate coaches from top schools. They have gone through rigorous training, and during the application process, they will give students more hands-on guidance, such as editing their personal statements, reviewing their applications, giving feedbacks, and so on. Here is just a quick breakdown of some of the resources that we offer to our students. The academic mentorship, it is an exclusive research opportunity for high school students. Our Leadership and Innovation Lab, or LIL, helps students launch a business, organization, or venture tailored to their interests with a leadership and entrepreneurship expert. Our internship, we work with some great companies and fast-growing startups for our students to gain work experience and practical skills early in high school. So we also have subject tutoring and test prep, and also college level writing courses to improve students' analytical and reflective writing skills. So here's more about our academic mentorship program. It is a process where students can work with an academic mentor, TAs, and also receive training on research methodologies, citations, and get publication support. So with these training sessions, students can produce college-level research papers, publications, and reputable journals and recommendations from their mentor. So by doing these, students can show to the college that they are really ready for college level work. And so therefore, we also have the connections. We give our students access to over 200 plus professors, researchers, and scholars. So these professors, their professional fields cover from like cancer biology, neuroscience, computer science, environmental science, history, and liberal arts and STEM majors, and so on. During academic mentorship, so our students will conduct with these personalized research project with one of these industry professionals in a topic of their interests. So then this is our leadership and innovation lab. We don't see it as just a leadership program. It is an entire ecosystem designed to help students launch, scale, and refine impactful projects. So in LIL, students work with expert mentors to build a structured action plan for their initiatives. So they gain access to competitive opportunities, fundings, and global collaboration networks. Usually, our LIL students showcase their work with their publications, conferences, and competitions, and 85% of our LIL alumni have been accepted to top 20 U.S. colleges. So because of the insights and experience of those counselors, we are able to build a cutting-edge curriculum, and all the expert members within the Ingenious Prep community receive systematic training based on the curriculum. So, of course, balancing all these moving parts, research, leadership, extracurriculars and applications, we might feel a little bit overwhelming. So that's why we developed and built the Genie in-house, our own student management system. It serves as a central hub where students can track their progress, manage tasks, access resources, and stay organized with their counseling team. And more importantly, the Genie ensures that all departments stay on the same page, creating a seamless experience for all students by keeping everyone aligned on deadlines, requirements, and other key milestones. So this way, our students can navigate the process efficiently and also stress-free. After all these, here are the results we got so far from this year. So we are having a really strong start for the 2024 to 2025 results so far. Our students have secured 53 Ivy Leagues and top 10 offers, 75 top 20 offers, 363 top 50 offers, and 593 top 100 offers. Our results are still coming in, and you can visit our latest results on Ingenious Prep's official website. During our last application cycle, our students received 112 Ivy League offers, 136 top 10 offers, and over 1,000 top 100 offers. So, and then when you compare our students to third-party applicants, they are 7 times more likely to be admitted to top 30 university, 8 times more likely to get into an Ivy League, and each additional year of working with us, their chances of being admitted to these top universities will increase by 10%. And we also maintain a high review among our students and parents, and over 4,930 students love Ingenious Prep programs. So that's all about Ingenious. With that being said, I will hand over to Joel to give us more information on admissions trends and how applications are processed.
Thanks, Stacy. That was great. I think I can control the slides from here, so I'll just flip. Hi everybody. We have quite a lot to get through. So I might speak a little quickly. If anybody wants me to slow down, please just put it in the chat. But I'm going to try to get through all of this because I think there's a lot of important information. So, um, right now is a very interesting time to be applying to college from Texas. I think that being from Texas has some real distinct advantages right now, and then it has some somewhat unique challenges. One of the unique advantages, obviously, is access to in-state schools. In the last several years, what we've seen is that schools like Rice, UTA, well, UT, Texas A&M, et cetera, have really started climbing the rankings in a variety of different ways. And part of that is that they're very strong in disciplines that have become much more popular recently, like engineering. The part of it is just that there has been a kind of gravitation of students out of the Northeast and into the South in general. But what that means is that you have sort of a priority access to a set of schools that are more competitive now, or at least more selective now than they have been in the past, and will likely continue to get more selective and higher ranked. So that's a good thing. I assume everybody is familiar with sort of the automatic admission policies. There are a few states that do this. Michigan is another one of them. Texas is one that famously does it, where the top 10% of Texas high school students for UT Austin, which I will just refer to as UT, it's top 6%, and I think going forward next year it's 5%. Gain automatic admission to the public universities. This also it means much lower tuition. If you're an in-state resident, there's kind of exclusive access to financial aid and grants and scholarships for in-state attendees. It's easier to get sort of residency in Texas for the purposes of tuition, meaning that if you live in Texas for 12 months, it qualifies for in-state tuition. There are other states where you have to have been a resident for longer, which probably does not impact most of the people on this, in this group directly, but it is something worth considering, I think, for the broader population about where they, where they go, where they attend high school, et cetera. The fact that you can transfer between schools is obviously a real perk, especially where you have a number of universities like Texas A&M. Is probably not, it's not as well regarded as UT or Rice. But it does have a top global engineering program, and they have particular specialties within their engineering program that are particularly selective and also highly sought after. So your ability to transfer between these programs is really excellent. And then, of course, there's the strong job connections. Texas schools are known to have strong alumni networks that support each other. Texas has, much like kind of New York or California, its own sort of economy. So going to a Texas school is often, especially a top-ranked Texas school, is often a really good way of accessing this sort of economy in Texas. It's like if you want to go get a job on Wall Street, presumably your number one choice isn't Rice or UT. But if you want to work in finance, there are amazing positions all throughout Texas that being from a Texas school gives you a bit of priority access. So talking about some trends, looking at UT specifically, applications and selectivity at UT has surged enormously in recent years. There are a number of reasons why that is the case, which I've already sort of touched on. But this is likely to continue. So looking at like a 20% increase for 2024, a 24% increase in 2025. That means that we've nearly doubled the volume of applicants and applications in 5 short years. Again, I think this is it might slow a little bit, but it's likely to continue. And at this point in time, for out-of-state applicants, UT is, fundamentally as competitive as some of the, top 15, Ivy plus schools, et cetera. And this is also then reflected in sort of the auto admit policies at UT. This is, I think, kind of where the rubber meets the road as to the advantages of being in state. It is exceptionally difficult to be admitted to UT if you are not an auto admit student or if you are an out of state student. It is very, very competitive. 75% of their incoming classes are auto admit students. That means that there's not that many spots left for students who aren't. And your probability of getting in goes way down if you aren't an auto admit student, even if you are an in-state student. So understanding sort of the requirements to be one of these auto admits is quite useful. I'll say kind of as an aside that most Ivy League schools, when they're thinking about whether a student is academically qualified, they're looking for students who are, at the very least, in the top 10% of their grade academically, if the student goes to a competitive private school, and if you go to a public school, more like top 5 or top 3%. So, the kind of threshold here to be an auto admit at UT also happens to correlate very highly with the threshold to be considered academically qualified at some of the kind of Ivy League and Ivy Plus schools. Here's just a look at sort of the acceptance rate for in-state and out-of-state students. As you can see, acceptance rate for in-state students is just shy of 4 times the acceptance rate for out-of-state or for international students. Just a point on the international bit there. I know, it's probable that some of the people on the call are in fact, international families who either live in Texas or their student goes to school in Texas. What matters is where you go to school. So it's not, even if you aren't a green card holder, et cetera, where you live, where you go to school, that's what matters for the purposes of determining whether or not you are sort of classified, compared to international applicants or not. Another thing that's interesting, and this is true across schools, all schools, not just Texas schools, is that there's beginning to get a real divide in terms of the admissions rates for competitive majors and not. Today, this business, the kind of biomedical sciences, engineering, and computer science are by far the most selective in most cases, which means that it's way easier to get admitted to some of these schools if you're interested in, say, the humanities, education, et cetera. I mean, like, to put a really fine point on this is if you look at a school like UCLA, at UCLA, your chances of the overall acceptance rate at UCLA is 8.7%. So it is actually as selective as many of the Ivy League schools. If you are applying as a student who's interested in history, your probability of getting in is 52%. If you're interested in anthropology, your probability is 44%. But if you're interested in nursing, which is very, very selective, especially for that school, your probability of getting in is less than 1%. And so one way of thinking about the admissions process beyond sort of your geography is thinking about it in terms of your areas of interest. You want to identify schools that are good in the field that you're interested in, that are kind of well ranked and well regarded, but where you are going to stand out from the crowd because you're not applying for like the most popular thing. Here's Rice. To my mind, Rice is one of the most underrated schools in the United States. I think within Texas, it is obviously not underrated, but outside of Texas, internationally, within the Northeast, on the West Coast, Rice is not given, I think, the amount of due it deserves. If you look at kind of what makes an Ivy League school an Ivy League school, right? So it's like, why are these Ivy League schools sought after? Firstly, Ivy League is a kind of athletic conference, meaning that it originally was just created as because those schools competed against each other athletically. The fact that they are older schools, the fact that they had quality education meant that they sort of over time accumulated this reputation for excellence. But today, what makes an Ivy League school an Ivy League school kind of breaks down into just 2 general categories. The first is that they have a lot of money. They have huge endowments. They have a ton of money to spend. They get a lot of federal grants. Why is that important? It's important for everything, for how many faculty you can hire per student, for the dorms themselves, for study abroad opportunities, for facilities, for the STEM fields. So that is incredibly important. And if you were to look at school ranking and then look also at a ranking of schools by endowments, what you would find is that these two are very, very similar. So that's one. The other is the strength of the alumni network is the other thing. Now I understand that this is a little bit a little bit derivative, or a little bit oversimplifying. But the truth of the matter is that Rice, in my mind, has the same kind of profile that gives Ivy League schools their sort of exalted status in American higher education. So Rice also seeing a pretty big, not quite as steep increase in acceptance. A very low acceptance rate in its sort of inaugural ED2 round. Early decision is extremely important. If you can apply early decision, we strongly recommend it. in general, early decision will increase your probability of success at an individual school between 2 and 4 times, meaning if your probability is 20%, it will take your probability to 40 to 80% for an individual school. There's a lot going on right now in higher education that is making schools more fond of using early decision to fill their freshman class. So, for example, Columbia and UPenn, which are two schools that have no difficult time finding students, are so interested in locking down their freshman class using early decision, because if you get admitted, you have to attend. They're so interested in that they will fill as much as 60% of their freshman class from early decision. And early decision does not represent anywhere near 60% of the total applications they receive. And part of the reason they do that is because they know that those students might then get into Harvard or Yale or Princeton and choose Harvard or Yale or Princeton over them, which they don't want. So early decision, very, very important. The acceptance rates by major, these are the most popular majors. Obviously, these are considerably lower. On the flip side of this, if you're interested in like the humanities, if you're interested in English literature, comparative literature, etc., the acceptance rates will be much higher. Now, at the same time, you want to make sure that Rice is actually strong in those fields. An example of this is sort of like everybody thinks of Johns Hopkins as being a school that is oriented towards engineering, biomedical engineering, and medicine. And that's true. That's what it's known for, and it does have among the top medical schools and medical systems. But they actually also have a really good creative writing program that nobody really knows about. If you apply and you're interested in creative writing, your probability of getting in is many times greater than your probability of getting in if you say you're interested in medicine or engineering, etc. And then Texas A&M, obviously a little bit less popular than Rice and UT. It's gained recognition as a strong option. I think part of that is a result of the overall rise in popularity of Texas schools. I also think that it's partly because it's a really strong engineering program, and engineering is kind of where it's at right now. So when the economy shifts to favor a particular discipline, those schools that are strong in that discipline are going to benefit, and those schools who are weak in that discipline are really going to suffer. It's part of the reason that Yale over the last several years has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in its engineering program, because only a few years ago, its engineering program was ranked nowhere near where the university was, and it was ranked well below many of the other Ivy League schools. But Yale is relatively intelligently run, and so they were like, oh, well, we really need to invest in this because this is clearly going to be where the economy goes and where students are going to want better resources. Similar to UT, A&M has seen a dramatic 1/3 increase in undergraduate enrollment over the last several years. It makes it one of the largest universities in the country, with its current student body exceeding 74,000. They're going to sort of cap enrollment for undergraduates going forward as a way of addressing this. They're also implementing a wait list for the 2025 admission. Going to a really big school versus a smaller school, there are obviously advantages and disadvantages. It tends to be the case that smaller schools will also have stronger or more tightly wound alumni networks. So the more valuable alumni networks tend to be from smaller schools, just because it's a smaller group of people that's not quite as anonymous. The bigger schools will also tend to have slightly better facilities for things like STEM fields. Unless you're talking about comparing them to schools that have billions of dollars like Rice, the Ivy Leagues, etc. So key takeaway, Texas schools are becoming more popular. That is a benefit to the people on this, listening to this presentation. It means it's a little bit harder for you, but it also means that you have priority access to schools that are more desirable. So in net, it's probably a good thing, although it means you have to work a little harder. These policy changes really do matter. UT lowering its admissions threshold reflects growing demand, makes it much harder to qualify. At this point, qualifications of getting into UT, on an academic basis alone are fairly comparable to the academic qualifications to be considered a good candidate for an Ivy League school. That's quite a high threshold. Rice is, I think, sorely underrated in the United States. I doubt very much that's true of the folks on this call, but if you don't think of Rice as being comparable to the Ivy League schools, I think that it's worth reconsidering. That it is genuinely a school of that caliber with that kind of resources, and whether people recognize it right now, they will recognize it in time. Always the rankings and recognition reflects quality, not immediately, but it gets there. In the same way that it was obvious that UT was underrated for a long time, and and most likely the UC schools are overrated currently, and like UMich, another great state school, underrated. So these things kind of in time they all sort of revert to the mean, which is that eventually their prestige, their selectivity will revert to reflect their actual competitiveness. Action steps for Texas students: take advantage of in-state public university system as strong safety options. It's well worth it. If you get into UT, that is an excellent school for every single person. There's no student who should go to UT and feel terrible about themselves. That's ridiculous. And so you're fortunate to live in a state that has that, because most people don't. It's not like New York has a set of schools where it's like there's a state school you can get auto admission to that is as top tier as UT. It doesn't. Most states don't. Reaching the top 5% for UT or the top 10% for other Texas schools guarantees admission. It offers security in the admissions process. Even if you're outside the top 10%, you still worth applying. You still do get priority over out-of-state applicants. Rice, because it's private, follows different policies. So most of what we talk about in kind of the remainder of this session about kind of elite school admissions will be applicable, to Rice in particular, as it will be applicable to out of state or out of auto admit applications to UT. Data. I said at the beginning of this that being from Texas it's an interesting time because there's some advantages, and I've covered those. There's also some disadvantages. The disadvantages is that Texans in the aggregate are overrepresented at a lot of different elite schools. Part of that is because Texas has a lot of really good schools, private schools and public schools. And so what that means is applying from a state like Texas is, on the whole, more competitive, more difficult than applying from some other states. Why? Because most of these schools care about geographic diversity. They're only going to accept so many students from Texas. They're only going to accept so many students from California, so on and so forth. So, for example, California graduates about 20% of all high school graduates in the United States, but they only represent 12% of the Ivy League, which is to say that being from California, all things being equal, cuts down your probability of success at the Ivy League by about 40%. Now, I don't have exact figures on Texas, mostly because it doesn't really exist. Most of the Ivy League schools don't necessarily, well, some of them at least don't disclose that, but it's safe to say that it would look similar, coming out of Texas. So why does this matter? It matters because there are schools where Texans are likely underrepresented, but that are still top schools, right? So it's likely, not just likely, it is the case that Texans are underrepresented at schools like Dartmouth and Cornell, that they are underrepresented at schools like Northwestern, which, Northwestern, 3.7% of its student population are from Texas, whereas more than 3.7% of qualified applicants, or of qualified applicants in general, are from Texas. So that gives you an opportunity to find schools where you might have a better shot coming from Texas than others, and also to know which schools are going to be especially difficult. Just another kind of point on some of the schools in Texas. A number of different outlets have been, they use these terms all the time. Every year there's a set of articles. What are the new Ivies, or what are the Southern Ivies, or what are the the public school Ivies, and the insert kind of descriptor Ivies. I never really like these because I think that the analysis is pretty shallow. Like I said, I think that at the end of the day, what makes an Ivy League school so valuable, what makes MIT so valuable, what makes Stanford so valuable, which I understand are not Ivy League schools, but they're sort of classed the same way, is a combination of how much resources they have, or money, and how they spend it. And then on top of that, sort of their alumni network. That they have those two things, you can replicate most of what makes Ivy League schools special, or what has made them special over time. It's a little bit, a little bit oversimplified, but in any event, I think that in my mind, Rice is actually is what is currently what most Ivy Leagues are. So I don't necessarily draw a distinction between Ivy League schools and Rice. I think UT is a little different in the same way that I think the UCLA and UC Berkeley are a little bit different. Bigger schools, more students. There's sort of very strong departments. There's less strong departments. So I'm not sure I would necessarily say it's the same thing, but it's an excellent school. Like I would rather send my son or daughter to UT than to NYU. My personal opinion. And I wod probably rather send my son or daughter to Rice than at least half of the Ivy League. In any event, let's keep going because I'm worried that I'm moving too slowly here. So thinking about applying to non-Texas schools, right? So Texas schools, you have some really good options. You have the auto admit option, which might not necessarily fit for everybody. And you'll pay way lower tuition if you're in state. So like there's a lot of reasons to focus on the Texas schools. There are some reasons to think about other schools as well, and not every student should, and some students should definitely do so. So part of this has to do with just sort of post-graduation opportunities. There are students who have, this is sort of a crass way of looking at it, which is just to think about it in terms of money. But a lot of families think about it that way. And to be honest, so do I, which is like, what are your opportunities after you graduate? The reality is that the Ivy League schools and equivalent, MIT is actually would be the highest on this list. They still do offer a pretty significant benefit in terms of overall compensation after graduation. It's not huge. That is to say, like if you look at the median, there's a slight benefit, maybe 10 to 15% towards Ivy League schools, but it's not gigantic. Now, where there is a huge difference, so there's been articles in the last few years that say there's no difference between going to an Ivy League and going to a public university. That's been a common refrain. And their evidence of that is that if you look at the medians of earners at these schools, they're not so far off, right? Like, the Texas schools on the upper end, you might be talking about $80,000 a year. And the Ivy League schools, it's like at the lower end, you're talking about like 90, et cetera. So it's not a massive difference. This statement that there is no difference is disingenuous in the extreme, because what most families, are thinking about is not so much the median. What they're thinking about is the far end of the bell curve, right? Making tons of money, being ultra successful through one metric or the other, right? Doesn't not always mean money. And if you look at that from that vantage point, like what percentage of the graduates from Ivy League schools are represented in sort of the ultra high earners, they are hugely, hugely overrepresented. So I think Ivy League graduates are like less than 1% of the overall college graduating population. They are something like 12% of the population of highest earners or top 1% earners. They represent, I don't know, 20 to 25% of all, was it billionaires? Or it was some group of super wealthy. And so that is to say that like, if your goal is to go off and be the most successful humanly possible, and you define that monetarily, right? There's obviously other ways of defining it, and I would argue that you should define it more broadly than with money. Your best bet is to go to an Ivy League school, and the largest reason that that's the case is that the most selective jobs, the most selective employers, and the strongest alumni networks come out of those schools. Like when I was starting Ingenious, I also started a real estate company that I still own. I didn't know anything about starting a business at the time. I was in law school and I was going to be a lawyer. I was like looking for advice, and I don't know why I got this in my head, but I was like, I know what I'll do. I will reach out to Dartmouth's most esteemed alumni or most famous alumni. Because there's a couple of billionaires, one of whom has been somewhat disgraced in recent years, named Leon Black from Apollo Investments, and the other was Tom Mandel from Lone Pine. But both of them responded to my email the same day, and I was on the phone with both of them, one of them later that night, the other one the next day. That's the value of going to these schools. You have access to people you would not otherwise have access to. And it can be extremely powerful. So in any event, the one way of looking at it is monetarily. Another way is to think about it. You could also, by the way, look at this not just in sort of the average per school, but the average based on a particular discipline. Because I assure you that if you're doing chemical or petroleum engineering, it doesn't really matter what school you're going to. You're doing pretty well after graduation versus if you're doing, Russian literature, not so much. So that's that. You could also think about this, by the way, in terms of like graduate school enrollment. I think that UT and Rice do a really good job of getting students into top graduate programs. I don't think that A&M does as good a job as getting students into top programs, but that matters as well, right? It's like if you're thinking I want to go to business school after, or I want to get a PhD after, this is quite a significant consideration. Sort of beyond salary, obviously there's geography, how far you are from your family. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. Cost of attendance, Ivy League institutions and the equivalent are extremely expensive. However, they are also so wealthy that if you can't afford to pay tuition, they will almost always fully fund your education. So in some cases, if you really can't afford education, the cheapest place to go is the Ivy League or the Ivy League equivalents, because they will give you every dollar that you need. So that is an advantage, especially for like the top students who really can't afford these colleges. Networking opportunities, campus culture, etc. Here's some schools where Texan applicants are underrepresented. What that means is that you will have a slightly higher than average probability of getting in applying to some of these schools. Then there's always going to be a larger set of schools where Texans are overrepresented. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the admissions process and how colleges evaluate whether or not you'll get in or not. I'll try to keep my comments a little bit shorter because I know I'm not on pace right now. So this is very, very important. This slide. If there's one slide to pay attention to in this whole presentation, it's probably this one. So it's basically how applications are actually evaluated by the admissions office. So the first thing that happens is that you submit your application. The application goes on top of a stack of applications, a digital stack that's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of applications long. Very importantly, these applications are then separated by region, meaning that each admissions officer gets a pile of applications from specific regions. Another way of putting that is when you submit, to X and Y school, Columbia, UPenn, et cetera, it'll be the Texas admissions officers who read every application. Another way of putting that is the people that you need to stand out from are the people in Texas, or even more importantly, in your city, and even more importantly, that at your school. Those will be the people that you need to be different than. So you don't need to worry about students outside of Texas. You don't need to worry about students in Nevada or California or New York or Connecticut. You don't need to worry about students from outside the United States. You need to worry about Texas students. Every school has a way of indicating that a student is qualified to be admitted, but is going to be rejected anyway because they don't stand out. At Stanford, they used to say qualified but not compelling, which means that you're qualified to get in, but you're not different in any way. You just look too much like other students, so you're getting rejected. Dartmouth used to write DNS, which stands for does not stand out. Johns Hopkins would say LMO, like many others. Every school has a way of doing this, but basically it means you don't stand out. So you're going to get rejected. So the admissions officer, once you have stood out to them in this stack of applications, and an individual admissions officer will read between 1,000 and 1,500 applications per cycle. That's can be as much as 20,000 pages. So the applications that stand out, the few, are then brought into a committee where admissions officers vote. And if you get enough votes, you're admitted. And if you don't, you are deferred, waitlisted, or rejected. So the takeaway is if you don't make an impression on the admissions officer, they won't advocate for you. You won't be accepted. Oh, okay. Well, I just ruined that. True or false? True or false? In the last 10 years, the number of applications that Columbia has received have doubled. False. They've actually tripled. So Columbia's last cycle received 60,000 plus applications. They have 28 admissions officers. That means that on average, each admissions officer read over 2,000 applications per cycle, each of which is 12 to 15 pages long. The reason I hammer this sort of like how many pages it is, because you need to understand that the admissions officer's job is really unpleasant. Right? They're reading these applications back to back, and most applications are pretty much the same as others. The students have similar interests. They write about the same things on their essays. They have the same extracurricular activities. It's like, how many students can you see that like plays violin or piano, does a bunch of like VEX robotics competitions, or does Model UN, et cetera? There's way more similarities across candidates than there are differences. And so it makes the kind of the importance of standing out that much greater. So just, let's do this game. We'll just do it in our heads, because we're shorter on time. But in the last admissions cycle, how many admissions officers at Columbia were assigned to read applications from Texas? And remember, there's, was it 28, 24, 28 admissions officers at Columbia? So the answer is there's basically two. One that does East and Southeast, and the other does everything that remains. So there's two for the entirety of Texas. Here they are. These are the two individuals, which means that if you're applying to Columbia, one of these people, is going to be reading your application along with the application of every other student from your student's school, every other student from the schools nearby. So they will have a very easy time figuring out if you're different, because they will be looking at your application in the context of other people from that area. So takeaways here. Your application is going to be around 13 pages long. It will be in a stack of applications as tall as a 20-story building. You are compared to other applicants from your region. That's your competition. And if you don't stand out, the admissions officer will not remember you or advocate for you. And as a result, you will not be admitted. So we should now understand the importance of standing out. Right? Standing out is kind of everything, right? You have to be different. You cannot be the same. So how do you differentiate yourself? In general, there's sort of four variables that sort of differentiate you. The first is, which we bracket separately, is grades and test scores. They don't really make you stand out so much as they qualify you for consideration. And then these other three, having a consistent theme or application persona, diversity, and leadership, those are really what kind of differentiate you. So threshold grades and test scores. Rather than kind of going into depth about the saga of test optional versus not test optional, let me just say this. If you're listening to this webinar, I would say there is a 99% chance that you should treat it as though tests are not optional at all, and you should take the tests, and you should take them seriously. Test optional is not really intended for people who will be viewed as already having advantages in the admissions process. That is to say, if you are Chinese American and you are applying without a test score, it probably doesn't look as good because there's going to be a lot of Chinese Americans who do submit test scores and do very well. So assume that the tests are not optional. It's also super confusing now because there's a whole bunch of schools that are test optional. There's some schools that are test blind, and then there's schools that are now going to test required. Just assume that the tests are required. That is the best piece of advice. Do not assume that they are optional. So like UT moving back to test required, A&M test optional. Again, just don't assume they're optional. If you don't do well on the test, good for you. You don't have to submit it. You still have a chance of getting in. I would recommend taking the test and submitting it if you do well enough. So true or false? 50% of students applying to Stanford with perfect SAT or ACT scores are rejected. False. It is 69%. Now, when I say that, I think most people think, well, if I don't have a perfect grades and test scores, then I definitely won't get it. That is the opposite of what I want you to take away from this. There are probably, at this point, there are a minimum of 2,000, but there's probably at this point closer to 2,500 students from the United States applying to colleges every year who have both perfect grades and perfect test scores. Do you know how many students there are in the freshman class at Harvard? It's like 1,700, meaning that Harvard or Princeton or Yale or Stanford could exclusively admit students who are perfect in grades and test scores and still have hundreds of students left over. But they don't do that at all, right? That's not at all what happens. And the reason why is that admissions, academic qualifications, grades and test scores are really more of a binary variable than anything else. You either are qualified or you are not. Once you are qualified, getting higher grades and higher test scores is not going to meaningfully improve your chances of getting admitted, right? So once you hit this sort of admission possible, part of this curve, getting higher grades and higher test scores is going to take a lot of your time, but will not give you much benefit, right? Another simple way of putting this is if you have a 1550 and you apply to MIT, killing yourself to get a 1600 is not going to meaningfully improve your chances of getting admitted. It just won't. For kind of in-state, the auto admission, this is a very different thing, right? So there is a specific threshold that the state schools have set. So obviously, what I'm talking about are schools that do not have an auto admit policy, or are like Rice, or or outside of Texas as well. So the next kind of logical question is, well, if you need to have these sort of threshold grades and test scores, what are they? The answer tends to be that you want to be at or slightly above the median. If MIT, the median is about a 1550. So that's sort of the threshold, meaning that if you get a 1600, it won't be really any different than having a 1550. I would ignore the kind of GPA column, because every school has a different way of calculating GPA. And so what I would instead think about it as is in terms of kind of how you rank relative to your peers. So if you're at a very selective school and you're the top 10% of your grade, you're probably academically qualified for most schools in the Ivy League, maybe not everyone. And then it sort of goes down from there. And here's just a look at the sort of the thresholds for some of the schools in Texas. So the takeaway is great GPA and test scores are not enough. Far from it. They kind of qualify you for serious consideration. But if you look at the applicant pool for Harvard, this came out during the lawsuit against Harvard for affirmative action. If you look at the applicant pool, about 80% of the applicants are academically qualified, meaning they meet the threshold grades and test scores. And of that population, fewer than 1 in 15 actually get admitted. And so one of the things that this tells us is that these other variables, diversity, leadership, and an application persona, are really doing most of the heavy lifting. So what is diversity? Diversity is anything that differentiates you from other applicants. It's not just race or ethnicity. It could also be kind of a unique academic interest. It could be unusual or uncommon extracurricular activities. It could be uncommon achievements. Most of the time, what we find is that our students, the things that make you diverse are not going to be race or ethnicity. The thing that's going to make you diverse is your academic interests and your extracurricular activities and your achievements. Those are the things that sort of make you different, right? So you don't see a lot of students applying to colleges who are interested in marine biology. You just don't. But you see a ton of students applying to colleges that are interested in engineering. So it's not that you should lie and say you're interested in marine biology when you're actually interested in engineering. It's just you should be more specific. There's a very, very big difference between saying I'm interested in engineering, in which case you are part of a pool of applicants that might be 12 to 15% of the applicant pool, but only 5 to 8% of the admitted students pool, right? So you cut your chances in half just by saying I'm interested in engineering. Versus you could say, I am interested in the use of applying the principles of mechanical engineering to the development of prosthetics. That is very interesting. You probably increased your probability of getting in, by 2x or so. These are things that are not diversity. Anything that you find at every school is not diversity, right? So being valedictorian, not diverse, right? There are 20,000 valedictorians in the United States. Captain of a sports team, there's probably 120,000 sports captains at high schools throughout the United States, assuming that there are 6 varsity teams per school, which is probably not actually, it's probably way more than that. And then being the president of a school club, again, so it's way too many of them. These things are not unique. They're not diverse. So you have to be diverse. Most of you will find that diversity through having a highly specific or unique academic interest, and then the extracurricular accomplishments that go along with it. Leadership is also very important. Leadership is really your ability to have an impact on people. If you say I'm the president of student government, I don't care about that until you can tell me what you accomplished as the leader of student government. And you can see in this sort of snippet from one of our students' applications, you see these kind of like these numerical, quantifiable metrics of their impact. That's very, very important for leadership. So examples of leadership would be things like managing people and projects, launching organizations, growing existing organizations or communities, right? So I joined this student group and I became the president. That's not leadership. I joined this student organization and I grew it, 500% and raised all this money. That's leadership. So title or position alone is not leadership. It's nice to have the title, but without the achievement, it doesn't matter. Personal excellence is not a form of leadership. Being great at something is not a form of leadership. And how long you've done something is not a form of leadership. Unfortunately, we do not have a ton of time. oh, we should do this. So I'll let everybody take a look at this for a minute. And then, we will vote on who gets into, Stanford, or who does better in the admissions process. I'll give you guys just a second on this. I'm going to grab water in the meantime. Okay. So who does better? Ben does much better. These are by the way, they're real students. I doubt this is their actual picture, although I don't actually know. We obviously have permission to use their information, but if you've taken pictures of it, please do not share it online. Just be respectful of their information. So why does Ben get in? So they GPA and test scores, they both kind of meet the threshold. So it really doesn't matter that Ben had slightly lower scores because they're both over the threshold. And then in terms of sort of passions and interests, right? Ben sort of has this kind of psychology / music, kind of theme that emerges here. And there really isn't an equivalent thing for Aiden. There really isn't anything going. That's sort of unique. So music and psychology, that's interesting. Leadership. Aiden kind of became a leader of many pre-existing clubs. Ben was the founder or the creator of organizations. Generally speaking, it's better to be the creator or the founder than it is to be the president, because if you're the founder, it shows that you are able to create something from nothing. You're able to have an original impact on your environment. And then Ben had a theme to his application. We call this theme an application persona, which is a very, very important part of kind of selective admissions, right? So the application persona is basically it's like your catchphrase. If I were to read your application and I were to summarize you in 2 sentences, it is how I would summarize you as the theme, right? And so if you've done like 10 different things, right? You're a scholar, you're an athlete, you're a philanthropist, you're an entrepreneur, et cetera, you have no theme, right? If you read Ben's application, what you'd find is that he had a very clear theme. It was a theme of sort of the intersection between music and psychology. And so that is an extremely important part. It makes you much more persuasive to the admissions office. It also makes you much more memorable, right? They're reading, over 1,000 applications. If you don't have a theme, it's extraordinarily difficult for them to, remember you and to kind of, return to your application later. So here's a few examples of application personas that some of our students have used over time. The important thing about applications personas, by the way, is that they're not an accident. You choose them, right? So if we work with a student starting in 8th grade, we're already starting to think about, well, what is this student's kind of core passion or interest? And that will eventually become their application persona. And so you build an extracurricular profile around that theme, right? And as you do that, right, the persona is sort of representative of what makes you different, your diversity. You build the extracurricular activities, which is sort of the leadership, the impact, et cetera, and also partly the diversity around that theme, right? So diversity, leadership, and application persona are all closely linked and overlapping concepts. They're not separate. So 2 ways of going about an application persona that's effective. The first is being very, very specific. So like botanist committed to rebuilding the endangered flora of Mongolia. So that would be a student, as opposed to saying I'm interested in biology or zoology. It's obviously highly, highly specific. The other option, which is more common, is going interdisciplinary, right? So if a student is interested in like entrepreneurship and soccer, it's like, creating youth leagues, to help at-risk youth, escape crime. This is one of our students who, this past cycle, who was admitted to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. If you can kind of see through the honors and awards, which is the middle, the activities list, which is on the left, and the future plans snippet from his application, that this student had a very clear persona, right? The sort of like journalism poet persona was extremely heavy throughout the application. So there's no part of the application where you say, this is my persona. It needs to emerge organically. So if you were to write down your activities, your accomplishments, etc., I should be able to see the application persona from there. Here's another student who got into Cornell and CMU, interested in ed tech. We are almost out of time. I'll just quickly go through one case study and then we'll wrap. So this is a student of ours, went to a public high school in Texas, had a 4.0 out of 5 weighted GPA. Just so everybody knows, most admissions officers will unweight GPAs in the admissions office, and they consider the difficulty of the student's course load as a separate variable. Not every school does it that way, but many of them do. The students in the top 25% of their class. They were also interested in pre-med. Pre-med is hugely competitive. It's right up there with sort of engineering and CS. So that can be tough. The student was applying to UT in-state from a public school, but he was not close to the 6% cutoff. Wanted to be a pre-med student, which is a very popular program, particularly at UT. Came from a multicultural background, but didn't know how to write about his experiences in a compelling way. So these are sort of the challenges the student faced. So one of the first things that we did is we connected the student with one of our professors, Professor Vukelic, if I'm pronouncing that right, a professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia. He completed a one-on-one research project. So the student focused on the use of laser material in eye surgery. He learned about the physics behind lasers and their applications to medicine. And then as a final research project, he coded his own computer application to tell a theoretical laser how to trace the topography of a human eye for surgery. So this is, sort of, you're starting to showcase your uncommon achievements related to a specific area of interest. He included this research experience in his Common App demonstrating a more kind of specific interest in biomedical engineering specifically. So that's very, very important. So we're now more specific. We are also, on top of that, starting to acquire unusual achievements or uncommon extracurricular activities. Here was sort of his theme, the application persona. An aspiring physician combining biomedical engineering and medicine to help people restore clear vision through technology. This is both specific and interdisciplinary. So that's a nice way of standing out. This was obviously reflected, in letters of recommendation, as well as sort of if you could have any career question at UT and his broader essays. Ultimately, the student was accepted to UT. Not trivially, the student also got a full ride to Washington University in St. Louis, which I'm guessing that WashU in St. Louis is similarly undervalued in Texas as Rice is undervalued in St. Louis. But WashU St. Louis is like, it's a top 20 school. That's an extremely competitive school. So that's excellent. So, one of the things that you should be thinking about if you're, wanting to be, a Longhorn, you want to identify a first choice major and sort of graft your extracurricular profile around that particular subject area. You should also think about this sort of expanded resume, which I think is great. I think more schools should do it. And sort of what you would put on it, how you would describe your activities. For Rice, probably the most important thing I can recommend that you do is apply early decision. It's very, very competitive. ED is a very good way of improving your chances of getting in. And for A&M, I strongly recommend that you take advantage of rolling admission and apply early. These schools want to settle their classes as early as possible because all of them care about their yield rate. That is the proportion of students who get admitted who ultimately attend the university. If the yield rate is low, it hurts their ranking. If the yield rate is high, it helps their ranking. So admitting students earlier helps their yield rate because they can get commitments from students earlier, as opposed to waiting. So that's it for today. Just a kind of another look at sort of our admissions results from last year. As Stacy was describing it, I just wanted to clarify that this year we only have results really for early decisions. So we're fully expecting our results this year to be meaningfully greater than last year. We're still waiting on regular decision results for a lot of the top schools. Let me just sort of lastly say, the way that you can think about the programs that Ingenious and To the Top offer together. they really fall into two categories. So in one case, what we call candidacy building, which is all the work that we do prior to the application, right? If you're in grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, 10, 11, et cetera. And these other things like academic mentorships, which is research with a professor, leadership and innovation lab, which is essentially a startup incubator to help students launch their own companies and nonprofits, test prep and tutoring, et cetera, internships. Those are all part of candidacy building. It's all part of the way that we help students identify their passions and then build on those passions in ways that demonstrate leadership, make them diverse, and kind of cohere an application persona. Application counseling is what you do for the applications. So the way that our programs work is that it goes by grade year. So if you're in grade 10, there's a grade 10 program. If you're in grade 11, there's a grade 11 program. And those programs include all of the kind of relevant resources that we've talked about today. With that, I'll turn it back over to Stacy, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to help answer them if I can. So this question is about Rice, about indicating a major. So with all schools that you apply to, in general, you're not selecting a major in advance, right? But you are telling them what you think you might want to major in. So there's usually a section on the application for what's called future plans. And then there's a section in the supplemental essays or the supplemental questions for the school that ask sort of what you might be interested in majoring. You don't have to do that thing, but it is important that you indicate to them that you have a specific interest, right? Because when they're trying to create a class, they don't want to admit too many students from engineering or too many students from political science. They want to be able to balance it. And so giving them some sense of what you might want to major in is important. But you're not selecting a major. You usually don't select a major until your sophomore year. You can change your major as late as junior year of college. Okay. Will ED Rice lower your chance to get financial aid? Trying to think why that would be the case at all. So because you're bound to go, I suppose. Generally speaking, if you get admitted ED and you cannot afford to go, and that is demonstrated that you cannot afford to go because they haven't given you financial aid, they will release you from your contract. They're not going to force you to go even though you can't afford it, nor will they say you can't attend any other school. So I've actually never heard that question before, which is interesting because actually it makes some sense, right? If you're bound to go, why would they give you as much financial aid to kind of incentivize you? Part of it might have to do with the fact that you probably are committing to schools before they offer you financial aid. The short answer is I have never heard that before. So I don't believe that is the case. I don't know, Michelle, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a theory about that, but it's not true because Rice is so well endowed. That's not going to hurt your chance of getting financial aid from Rice. That might be true for some other colleges that are need aware, but that's not the case with Rice.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Joe. I think we're gonna wrap it up. So come to an end for our session today. Thank you again, Joe, for a very insightful presentation.
Pleasure.
And also Michelle.
Thanks so much for everybody.
The webinar.
Very good, very good.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks
Bye.
so much, Michelle. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.